We're here at the Volkswagen Autostadt in Wolfsburg, Germany, because we are the first in the world to test and drive the VW ID.3. And this is the version we're testing, a prototype that's already very close to series production. It came off the production line in Zwickau just like this and was sent straight to us. But are we really the very first? Because Germany's national football coach Jogi Löw was already allowed to drive this car, and it's fake news that he ended up in the hospital because of it. So what are we going to do with this car today? We'll do an innovation check. We will check it out on many points and say whether the car is innovative, state-of-the-art, or maybe not so innovative after all. Is the interior design particularly innovative? Well, it's a purely electric model, and that means they can use the space differently right from the outset, and that's a good thing. It's also much better than simply using a combustion model and then installing an electric motor, because in combustion engine cars, you have to live with a few design elements that are logical for a combustion engine, but illogical in the case of an electric car. For example, there's something here I'm unfortunately not allowed to show you. It's concealed under this covering here. I'd love to show you, but all I can say is it looks very tasty. But I can't show it to you because VW also wants to have a little something to present when the car, I think, will be unveiled in its entirety at the IAA this year. So, where was I going? A combustion car would have a gear shift or something similar, especially in the case of a manual transmission, and you would have a big transmission tunnel here in the middle. You don't need that with an electric car. Tesla is already taking advantage of that. You can use the space for other things, for cup holders, storage space, or just for a more airy feeling, and that's what they've done with the ID.3 here. You can sit very comfortably here in the front. It's a good fit. You don't feel like you're sitting on a big elevated battery. And I just adjusted the seat. I still need to back it up a little bit. And I have a good seating position. Now let's turn around and see what it looks like on the back seat. Ta-da! The back seat. I'm going to make myself at home. I'm keeping my head down for now because I'll check the headroom in a minute. What matters to me is I have plenty of legroom here. My thighs are still on the seat. There are cars that offer more leg support. Part of the reason for this is that the battery is in the undercarriage, and the whole thing is a little bit higher. But as you can see, I have knee room here, plenty of space, and now I'm going to straighten up. My head is not scraping the ceiling. Now, I'm what they call a sitting giant, and that has always been a bit difficult for me, that I'm still tall when I'm sitting down. I can still fit in here, but if I were an inch taller, I wouldn't. Anybody under 6 feet tall can probably sit pretty comfortably back here. And here's a very important aspect. Often, you can see that there is a cardan tunnel in four-wheel drive cars. With this car, that wouldn't matter if it was a pure front-wheel drive car, but it's a rear-wheel drive car. In a conventional Constellation, you would actually have to have a drive shaft in here if you had the motor in front and the driven axle in the back. But you don't have to do that with an electric car. It's rear-wheel drive anyway, so you have more room here too. Well, let's go to the back, close the door, and now we can do something in the back that even Jogi Löw wasn't allowed to do. He got to drive the car, but he wasn't allowed to, ta-da, inspect the trunk like we can. You know, it's a little bit funny because usually this is something car testers don't like to do, talking about the trunk, discussing an empty space. But in this case, it's really quite interesting what VW has done, because the whole engine and all the trimmings are underneath. I'm going to need some more space for that. So the volume of the trunk is, you can't say for sure. I asked VW, of course, they didn't want to publish any figures yet. What they revealed is it's supposed to be bigger than in the VW Golf. So I can only speculate, but if you have a look at the trunk, go ahead, have a look. It doesn't look like it's bigger than the Golf. But sure, I forgot one thing. You can open up the double bottom here, and then there's extra space underneath where I can store the charging cable, for example. That looks pretty respectable. And above all, I'm not forfeiting much space in spite of the fact that the entire powertrain is underneath this space. So now I have to guess. And then later, when the factory specifications come out, you'll say I was way off. But I'll just say 392 liters. 93. Well, you can prove me wrong in any case if my estimate is off. But that's more or less what it looks like to me. Okay, let's close this thing up again. This is a nice-sized trunk for an electric car. I can get pretty much stuff in here. And there is no automatic tailgate, at least in this version. And can I tell you something? I don't like electric tailgates because I am quite capable of reaching in here and closing it all on my own. Isn't that great? It is rather ironic. An electric car without an electric tailgate. I think it's good. So, the interior design concept, is it innovative? Yes, it's innovative because it's a genuine electric car platform and because it gives me a little bit more freedom. But there are still some restrictions when you consider the height of the foot space as well as the headroom. It might feel a bit cramped for very tall people. And of course, we still have to talk about the charging procedure. Is it particularly innovative? Is it very fast? Let's start from the beginning. We have an EV charging station here with an alternating current and direct current charging. The AC charge is 11 kilowatts of three-phase current in the best case. And what is the ID capable of? That depends a little bit on the battery, whether you have the big battery with 77 kilowatt hours of energy, or this one with 58 kilowatt hours of energy. In that case, you can actually charge the battery using 11 kilowatts on a three-phase charger. And that's quite good, because if you have a wall box at home with that kind of power, then you can still charge a relatively large battery overnight. With a smaller battery with 45 kilowatt hours, the situation is a little bit different. It can, air quotes, only handle 7.2 kilowatts of charging power. Normally, I would complain and say that's really not enough if the battery were bigger. But with such a small battery, you can still get it full overnight, and then it's still okay, even though there are some that are faster. There are also cars, Tesla and the like, that are capable of 22 kilowatts. Okay, so much for the three-phase charge. Now let's look at the DC charge. This is, of course, much more important on long trips because when you're on the road, you don't want to spend so much time at a filling station, well, the charging station, whatever. And of course, I need as much power as possible. Let's take some other models as an example. Which one is really, really fast? For example, the Audi e-tron, 150 kilowatts. We tried it out. Really very high charging power. That's the top of the line at the moment. Porsche is even advertising that they will have a charging capacity of over 300 kilowatts in the near future, but those are also very large batteries. After all, how much charging power, or better said, how much current you can push into the battery also depends on how big the battery is. The bigger the battery, the more power it can handle, and the more charging power you can push into it. Now, if we look at the ID, that's exactly what we're talking about. You just hold this here to get one of the CCS charging plugs out. It registers your authorization. You can remove it, and that's the ID's charging system. It uses CCS. So, works perfectly. I'll go around this way. Again, there are different charging capacities. The big battery with 77 kilowatt hours can handle up to 125 kilowatts of charging power, simply because the battery is bigger. What's going on over here? Charging process in preparation. It'll start soon. The mid-sized battery, namely this one, and the small battery with 45 kilowatt hours are capable of, air quotes again, only 100 kilowatts. When you go to a modern Ionity or other CCS charging station, because that's what you want, the very latest stations, old charging stations like this, for example, can do significantly less. For example, I don't know exactly, it doesn't say here, just 20 kilowatts to maybe 50 kilowatts. Of course, there are still many, many of them around. They're still viable, too. You can use them. But is the charging power, the actual charging power, really so crucial? Because when you look at it closely, you see, yes, there are already several cars on the market that can do a lot better, faster, but what is even more important for the consumer is how many kilometers of range can you get into the car in a certain period of time. For this car, VW says, in half an hour, you can get 260 kilometers. That's pretty respectable, especially if you compare it to other VW Group vehicles. With the Audi e-tron, for example, you get a range of 280, 290 kilometers after just 1/2 hour of recharging. Depends, of course, how much you use. So the most important thing is not the maximum charging power, but also what the power consumption of the car is to get a lot of range. And if you consider that, then the ID offers very respectable values. Sure, there are still some on the market that are faster, but in my judgment, on the aspect of charging power, state of the art. Now we need to talk a little about the driving dynamics of this car. A few key facts about the car. It has a maximum speed of 160 kilometers per hour. Now some of you will say, wait a minute, there are electric cars that can go a little faster. But if you drive an electric car, you'll quickly notice that that's not so great from an energy point of view, because driving faster requires much, much more energy, because there is air resistance, which increases exponentially. The energy you need is actually increasing to the power of 3. That means that at some point it is no longer so advantageous to drive particularly fast with an electric car, and that's why VW decided to say, okay, this car has a maximum speed of 160. That's enough. And that top speed will still provide you with a good range. I would even say that's entirely enough for an electric car. So what else do we have? Acceleration, from 0 to 100. Of course, there is no official value for this car yet. There's some speculation, less than 8 seconds. Of course, that depends a bit on which battery you have under the hood. This one is the mid-size battery with 58 kilowatt hours. And the car probably weighs roughly, VW hasn't released any figures, about 1.6 tons. Probably under 1.7 tons, so you can calculate how quickly it will accelerate. It's pretty respectable. Mind you, it's not going to tear up the road. If you're looking for a Tesla Model 3 performance and acceleration, no, it's not offering that. But it has decent driving dynamics. We can just do it again. We can just accelerate again. That's fine. This is fun. Makes a good impression. The engine has 150 horsepower for a maximum of 30 seconds. And that's enough, too. You don't normally need more acceleration than that in everyday driving. 310 Newton meters of torque. That's about the same as a good turbo diesel engine, and you can have a bit of fun with it. I have to say that at the moment, the sense of speed is not so impressive, because unfortunately I'm not sitting alone in this car. There are some other guys in here, and the whole car is fully occupied. There is no other alternative because VW wouldn't let us drive the car on our own. There are a couple of technicians in here, and that's why the acceleration is a little bit muffled. It's still good, though. Enough for a grin on your face. And if I can drive it someday alone, then it'll probably go even faster. No big deal. Yes, unfortunately we can't do any exciting driving maneuvers right now, zigzag curves and the like. I'd like to do some cornering, but VW is keeping a close eye on me. I can already say that basically the car makes a very trustworthy impression, generally very safe. The road holding is good. Strictly speaking, it's built like any other compact car on the road today. Independent suspension, front and rear, McPherson struts in the front, and a multi-link suspension in the back, so that's pretty much state-of-the-art. What's the point of reinventing the wheel? It's fine the way it is. Okay, let's talk about the heart of the electric car, the battery. And the battery is not just, like with a combustion engine, some kind of container for storing energy that decides how far you can go with the car. The battery in an electric car is crucial for many, many factors. It decides the performance. How much electricity can I get out of the battery? The more electricity you can get out of the battery, the more power the electric motor has. But also, how much electricity can I put into the battery? That is to say, how fast can I recharge it? And that's not all. When you have a very large battery, you usually have a longer battery life in normal use. It also has some environmental drawbacks. We'll get to that, though. And the battery inside the ID is special in many ways. For example, the number of cell manufacturers. There are 4 different cell manufacturers for this battery. One is based in China, called CATL, but it's only significant for the Chinese market. And then there are 3 more, SKI, Samsung, and LG Chem, which are crucial for the other markets. And so, of course, VW can optimize for the different markets. But what is much more interesting for me is that VW is cooperating with LG Chem to build a cell plant in Poland. And that means that we will soon have our own battery factory in Europe. Up to now, all the batteries have been delivered from Asia, especially China. So that's a good thing, that they'll be coming from Poland. The other point is, this is a very modular battery concept. There are 3 different battery sizes available for the same wheelbase. That means that the space in between the axles remains the same. but it can accommodate 3 different batteries, 45, 58, and 77 kilowatt hours. The one here is the 58 kilowatt hours battery. That's the battery we're driving today. And as you can see, there's a little empty space here. There's a little extra room up front, too. So it would be possible to fit in a much larger battery. And that's an advantage, that I can choose from different batteries. Many other car manufacturers only offer a single battery. Some others offer 2. And now VW is offering 3 batteries on one platform. And that is very good for the customer and an innovation in my view. Now let's take a look at the energy density of the battery cell. That's a very important aspect. And this 58 kilowatt hour battery set up here weighs about 400 kilograms. Now we can calculate the gross energy content here is 62 kilowatt hours. So the energy density is 155 watt hours per kilogram of battery-based energy density, including the housing and all the trimmings. That's quite a lot. And the cell-based density is even higher, namely significantly more than 200 watt hours per kilogram of energy density, and that is a really great value. It wasn't even thinkable just a few years ago. To sum up, the battery is modular, the cells are assembled in Europe, and it has a very high energy density, and that is why the battery is definitely innovative in my judgment. Comfort is something we need to talk about. With the electric car, the noise comfort is a huge point on the one hand. Now, the general opinion is an electric car is always quiet. Why should there be any differences? There are huge differences. First of all, there's the issue of the type of motor it uses. There are electric motors that are a bit quieter and some that are a bit louder. This car has a permanent magnet synchronous motor inside, which is normally already relatively quiet, but nevertheless sometimes makes a noise like a tram, a kind of buzzing sound. There's also the aspect of how is the engine constructed? Where is it located in the car? How well is it muffled? In the ID, the engine is located in the back and is therefore relatively far away from the driver and the front passenger. That's an advantage compared to a front-mounted engine, which is much closer. But more important is the car's vibration muffling and noise insulation, and that's quite a challenge for the electric car designers. They call it NVH, noise, vibration, harshness. That's the technical term for the study and modification of the noise and vibration characteristics of vehicles. What kind of sounds does the car make? Are there creaking noises and the like? With an electric car, you don't have the combustion noise, which is relatively present during acceleration and thus masks other noises, but there is virtually no noise from the engine. That means other noises, wind noise, tire noise, creaking noises, other things are much more noticeable. So the designer's task is to make the car seem silent, although there is basically no engine noise to drown out the other sounds, because human hearing is very selective. Right now, you can clearly hear what's going on around the A-pillar. I can hear the wind whistling. My first impression of the ID is it's pretty quiet. Although the designer said to me at the beginning that it's going to make a lot of noise because it's not yet a production version, I do believe them, but what am I supposed to do? It can't be helped. Let's accelerate again. You can also listen. Turn up your volume a little louder wherever you're watching right now. You might hear a little wind noise at the front of the A-pillar. Something like that. We're already doing over 100 kilometers per hour, but otherwise the car is really very quiet. And there are some electric cars that are very noisy. There are huge differences. All right, we've talked about noise comfort. Ride comfort is next on my list. And where does ride comfort begin? We can talk about it right now. From the driver's point of view, it starts with the seats. Seats are a very important point, and I feel pretty comfortable right now. The seats are well adjustable, they offer a little lateral support, and they are nicely medium soft or medium hard, as you might say, padded, which is also advantageous for longer trips. What you can notice now, since we now have a few lateral grooves on the road, is that the ride is not ultra smooth. This is not like a Citroën DS, but it has pretty good handling, which I think is good. So you can feel the road a little bit, but still the car responds well. Have a look here. Whoa, there! It's always interesting to see how the suspension responds to that, how it smoothens it out. And my point is, there should be a whoomp, whoomp, and not a talk, talk. And I've got a light talk, talk in here. But in general, the suspension is all right. It's nice and agile. Also, the basic comfort is headed in the right direction, but it's still lacking some softness, especially when you go over cross bumps in the road. That's when I noticed that it needs a few adjustments, that there could be a little more gentleness in the chassis. Now, of course, we have to keep in mind that this is pre-production. It's still a prototype. VW can and certainly will give it some more attention and make some refinements. I find the comfort level at the moment about 87% good. They could add 13% to that, make the whole thing a little softer, a little more gentle. Is the electric motor, or are electric motors in general in their highest stage of development, innovative? For electrical engineers, this may seem like a no-brainer. Stupid question, because electric motors are extremely efficient in most cases. In many cases, they are already considered to be fully developed, in contrast to the combustion engine, where there's still some potential for improvement. So, what still needs to be improved? There are not that many operational principles for a three-phase electric motor as it is used in a car. There are actually two main principles. One is what they call an asynchronous motor. That's a motor in which the electric current is supplied to the rotor by means of electromagnetic induction. And then there is what is called a permanent magnet synchronous motor, where the rotating part inside, the rotor, is equipped with permanent magnets called neodymium magnets, and the rotation is synchronized with the frequency of the supply current to generate the counterforce. And the ID has a permanent magnet synchronous motor mounted on the rear axle. Well, that in itself is not very innovative at all. It has a very high efficiency and is very small given its performance of 150 kilowatts, the maximum you can get out of it. With the smaller batteries, you get less power from this engine, not because the motor is smaller, but simply because the battery itself delivers less power. But if you look closely at how this engine has developed over the years, it's very interesting. It goes back to the e-Golf. The electric Golf already had an engine that weighed 109 kilograms and delivered 100 kilowatts of power. This engine here weighs 90 kilograms and delivers 150 kilowatts, so it has 50% more power, but it weighs 19 kilograms less. That sounds as if a lot of innovation has been put in there. Sounds like the result of a lot of hard work. But it's less about efficiency, which can hardly be improved anymore. In the optimal range, this kind of motor already has well over 90% efficiency. Rather, they simply worked on the shape and the structure of the engine to provide more power while reducing the engine dimensions and thus using less material. And how did they do that? This is where it gets exciting. The e-Golf engine had a maximum torque of 290 newton meters. This engine here has a maximum of 310 newton meters. It's not that big a difference, but where does the extra power come from? From the rotational speed. Because power is not only generated by force or torque, but also by force and speed. That's how you generate power. And the new engine revs 16,000 RPM. Whereas the e-Golf engine only achieved 12,000 RPM, and with that difference you can generate significantly more power. How do you do that? Well, the VW engineers didn't really want to reveal that. It mainly depends on the rotor. That's the rotating part inside the motor, also called the runner, and since it has to rotate as fast as possible, it needs a relatively small mass and a small diameter. And that's how you make a particularly high-revving engine. And that's probably what they did here. The engine revs higher, has more torque, and to top it off, weighs a lot less and has significantly more power. However, this is still just a normal electric motor. That means it's not extremely innovative, but at least it's the very latest state of the art. Before we move on to the next topic, by the way, this little box here, the power electronics for the motor, is often overlooked and neglected. But it is also crucial with its fast, high-performance switches inside for how efficiently the entire system runs, and there's still some potential for improvement in there. You reduce the heat a little and make it more efficient, and I'm sure that will happen in the future. And of course, we have to talk about the price of electric cars. That's always a topic of discussion, and the question is the ID particularly inexpensive? Especially in the case of electric cars, you have to admit most electric cars are still relatively high priced for what they offer. You have to really want one. And that's one of the reasons why many people are currently still keeping their distance and saying, I can't afford to buy an electric car yet. There are already quite a few nice ones. Driving a Tesla is a lot of fun, but of course, you have to spend a lot of money. So let's take a look at VW. The e-Golf cost about 36,000 euros with a range of just over 200 kilometers. I'll be honest with you, that's a lot of money. For a good car with a decent range, but it was still a lot of money. It definitely wasn't cheap. And now VW is announcing that the ID, with the smallest battery, the 45 kilowatt battery, will have a range of 330 kilometers and cost less than 30,000 euros. It's much more affordable than the e-Golf. Now, of course, you have to say that VW has never been known for building the cheapest cars in the world, but they have always built cars that had a lot to offer. They left the market for cheaper cars to Seat and Skoda, but under 30,000 euros for over 300 kilometers of range is quite a good deal, especially when you deduct the subsidy for electric vehicles of 4,000 euros, comes down to about 26,000 euros, somewhere like that. And the average German pays 31,000 euros for a brand new car. Then again, at VW, you still have to take into consideration the surcharge list for optional features. Sure, you can get a car for 29,000 something. Well, they didn't tell me, but I know for a fact there will be an option list where you can choose a few extras and then you'll be in that price range pretty quickly. That's not exactly very cheap, but I think on the basis of what I've experienced so far with the car today, how it drives and how it feels, it's a reasonable price. Well, we have to be honest, of course. The car I am sitting in right now is not the car with the smallest battery, but with the medium battery, 58 kilowatt hours. But I also have 420 kilometers of range, according to WLTP, and I also have more power with the bigger battery, so 150 kilowatts and 204 horsepower. You won't get that for less than 30,000 euros. My estimate for this car, just the way it is equipped here, a little over 40,000 euros. I might be surprised when the official price list is released. We'll see. By the way, that is also roughly the same price range as the Kia e-Niro, for example. Is the modular e-drive system, known by its German acronym MEB, innovative? We all like to make fun of VW sometimes, don't we? MQB, MLB, all those abbreviations. But there's definitely something behind it. Let's start at the beginning. It's a good thing that they have their own electric drive platform in the first place. You could just do it like Audi with the e-tron or Mercedes with the EQC. You take an existing combustion engine, tinker with an electric drive, change the way it looks a little bit, but in the end you have to deal with several drawbacks, and then suddenly you discover vestiges of the combustion age in the electric car. It's a bit irritating, and here we don't have that confusion. This is really a separate modular system of its own, which is good. Tesla also has its own construction kit, its own chassis just for electric drives. Now, VW always pushes this modular construction concept very far. Just think of the MQB, the modular transverse kit for combustion engines, which contains a transverse engine. Then a very important point is that the distance between the front axle and the pedals, which are unfortunately not visible here, always stays the same, so that the front end can always be the same. And here too, you have a fixed distance between the front axle to the pedals. That means you can use the front end modularly. But the MEB takes it even further than the other kits, because on all the other systems, you can change the wheelbase. That is, from here in the middle to the wheel here. VW says, no, we'll just have one wheelbase, but we'll have several different battery sizes in it. There are various reasons for this. Safety reasons, for example. This way you only need one safety structure, which also makes serial production a lot easier. And if you plan the wheelbase accordingly, you can really put many different types of cars on it. That saves production costs and, hopefully, makes the car more affordable for the future customer. What else is different? Well, for one thing, we really have a rear-wheel drive here, truly rear-driven. I often read that people write, well, my car is rear-driven, and in truth, the car has a front engine and a rear-wheel drive. That's rear-wheel drive, but not really rear-driven. This is German nitpicking. Rear-driven means it has an engine mounted in the back that drives the rear wheels, and that's what we have here. Of course, it is great fun to drive. And this module here can be easily installed in various combinations. So, what do I do if I want a four-wheel drive? Well, you've still got your front axle, and it is designed to fit another engine very easily. This motor, however, is not a synchronous motor with permanent magnets like in the rear, but an asynchronous motor. Meaning, like I already explained, the rotor is powered by electromagnetic induction. This kind of engine is not quite optimal in terms of efficiency at partial load operational range, but what they can do very, very well is give an extra boost for a short time, and that's exactly what this is for. There's a permanent drive in the back, which is always running, and an asynchronous motor in the front to give the car an extra boost from time to time or to generate even more traction if needed. The asynchronous motor at the front also has, in quotation marks, only 75 kilowatts, but that's enough to give some supplemental power. However, that is not planned for the ID. It's intended for other cars based on the same chassis. And this chassis, and I think that's a really great idea of VW, is made for other manufacturers as well. That means other manufacturers can ask for this chassis and put their own cars on top of it. Obviously, with a wink and a nudge, you have to remember that the more of these VW builds, the cheaper the production will be. Anyway, it's a very innovative platform with many modular possibilities. Yes, definitely an innovation. Even though we may smirk a little bit about one detail back here, you may have already noticed it. This is a drum brake. Nowadays, disc brakes are common practice. But with an electric car, the brakes are used much, much less because you mostly slow the car down using recuperative engine braking instead of normal brakes. That means less stress on the drum brake. And a drum brake, like this, actually works pretty well for simply slowing down. Doesn't mean the car will decelerate worse. There are small cars that brake excellently. The problem with drum brakes comes with constant braking. That is not a racing brake. Definitely not. It will overheat faster than a better-cooled disc brake. But let's not forget, the overall concept here is not the concept of a super dynamic car, not the concept of a car trying to compete with a Tesla. The idea was for Volkswagen to build a widely used platform for electric cars. When we talk about efficiency, we also have to talk about recuperation, especially with electric cars. Recuperation is a very important aspect when it comes to building an electric car that is very economical. And above all, an electric car can indeed recuperate, unlike a combustion engine. And if you recuperate wisely, you can sometimes get up to 20% less fuel consumption, or the other way around, 20% more range. There are various different strategies. We'll take a look at the one on this VW ID here. Oh, this wrapping. Unfortunately, you are not allowed to see what I can see here, but I can tell you it's going to be good. There are two main recuperation modes, D and B. In D, when you just press the gas pedal or take your foot off of it, the car just rolls. From an energy efficiency point of view, the best thing you can do is let the car roll. For example, on the motorway, once you've picked up speed, when you just remove your foot from the power pedal, then the car rolls, and you are making optimal use of the energy. If you were to start recuperating at this point, it would not be ideal because you would have to charge the battery with the efficiency of the electric motor, which then results in charging efficiency. I would use electricity again to feed the electric motor. During that stretch, depending on the speed range, quite a lot of energy would be lost. In the worst case, only 50% of the energy is recuperated. At best, it'll be over 80%, but you're still losing something. But if we just let it roll, I won't lose much. Let's have a look. I'm in D mode right now. Pick up a little speed, and now I just let it roll. The moment that I hit the brakes here, it starts recuperating in D mode. And then it recuperates to approximately 2 meters per second squared, about 0.2 G maximum. There are already models in the electric car sector that can do more. The Audi e-tron, for example, 0.3 G. But then that is an all-wheel drive with power units in the front and back, while the ID has its electric motor in the rear. And if you know a little bit about braking, you know that when you brake, the front axle is stressed the most due to dynamic load distribution. The car's front goes down, and that's why the front axle is mainly responsible for braking. And under no circumstances do you want to overbrake the rear axle, because that's not a good situation for a normal driver. And that's why this is limited. Maximum recuperation value of 0.2 G is just what the technology currently allows. It's not particularly innovative, but it's sufficient. The important thing is that you can use it in many situations. Okay, in D, this recuperation is only activated when I hit the brakes. Now I can also go into B mode. There. Now, I didn't do anything else, and yet the car is slowing down. Now, I have a pretty strong recuperation just by taking my foot off the pedal. I release the accelerator, the car slows down quite a bit. This mode is ideal when you cannot just roll and thereby use the kinetic energy you have built up, like here in town, for example, when you are stopping at a traffic light, for example. Normally, the energy that you have built up while driving would end up warming up the brake discs when you want to stop, which is, of course, undesirable. Or when you're driving downhill, you have to slow the car down. You can't just let it roll without harming the car and the driver in the long run. But that's where the B mode is ideal. But the driver has to decide which mode to use. Whether there might be a more intelligent recuperation system in the future, perhaps with route prediction, like Audi has begun implementing. I asked VW engineers, but unfortunately they couldn't or wouldn't tell me that, unfortunately. But in general, this recuperation principle works pretty well already, and in B mode, the car slows down noticeably just when you release the electric accelerator pedal. Just take your foot off. Recuperation is an important part of efficiency, but there are other aspects as well. Vehicle weight, drag or air resistance, and the overall efficiency. So let's continue with air drag and weight. Air resistance. We have reference values. For example, the Tesla Model 3 has a CW value of 0.23. That's world class, of course, and the ID can't quite keep up with that, but it has approximately 0.26. An exact value has not yet been determined. However, even more important than the pure drag coefficient is the shape of the car. How much air resistance is there, really? And that is the combination of the coefficient of drag, CW value, times the face area. I don't know the values yet, but it has low aerodynamic drag. Whether it is exceptionally low for this class still remains to be determined. Wait, VW won't release any data. But I did a bit of prying and a bit of research. The car will weigh between 1.6 and 1.7 tons. That's not a lot, especially the battery is quite light. The 58 kilowatt-hour version of the battery now weighs only 400 kilograms, and the smaller version, 45 kilowatt-hours, is even said to be about 90 kilograms lighter. This means that it may well be that this car will weigh 1.6 tons. And in the lightest version, perhaps even a little less. That would be pretty outstanding in this class. Let's take a look at the tires, another very important point when it comes to efficiency, and there is one thing that has been getting on my nerves a lot lately. When I see these super eco low rolling resistance tires, especially on electric cars, they have a huge braking distance and they drive very strangely, and just because people want to have a few kilometers more range, that is to me not just a bad compromise, but simply the wrong decision. A car needs decent tires. Of course, they should have a good rolling resistance, but they should also drive well. VW uses Bridgestone Potenza on this one. That's not a proven low rolling resistance tire, especially not in this size. It's a 20-inch tire, but I think that's a good decision. But now we have mentioned all the driving resistances. We have the air resistance, which is low. Whether it is very low remains to be seen. We have the weight, which is of course higher. It is an electric car with a heavy battery, but overall the weight seems to be relatively low. We've got tires that don't have terribly low rolling resistance, but they are well suited for driving. And now, what are the actual consumption values when you really use this car out on the street? I didn't memorize them all, so I have a piece of paper here. I had to make a few estimates because I'll start with the small battery, 45 kilowatt hours. It has an official WLTP range of 330 kilometers. Now, you can calculate the internal consumption of the car, which is 13.6 kilowatt hours. That's what the onboard computer shows. The mid-sized battery has a range of 420 kilometers, which results in consumption figures of 13.8 kilowatt-hours per 100 kilometers, still calculated internally. With the large battery with 77 kilowatt-hours and 550 kilometers range, WLTP, you always have to remember this is not yet a real value, but still just a test value, but WLTP is still pretty good. We have 14 kilowatt-hours per 100 kilometers. In order to compare these values with other cars, we still need to consider charging losses, because after they've been driven on the WLTP test stand, they get plugged into the socket, which results in charging losses, and those are measured as well. All right, I've come up with a few numbers that are probably very applicable to these cars. For the mid-size model, 14.8 kilowatt-hours consumption. Now, let's take a look at the competition. We can compare that with a Kia e-Niro, for instance. The medium-sized model with a similar battery, according to WLTP, officially has 15.9 kilowatt-hours consumption. And a basic Tesla Model 3 is specified at 15.3 kilowatt-hours. Comparing these numbers, this clocks in as a very economical electric car, and that would be innovative, whereby whether these figures can be confirmed in the real world, we still need to find out with a nice, long-range drive, but not today. Is the production process innovative? And here the decisive question is it environmentally friendly? VW has released one significant statement regarding the ID. It says, the car's manufacturing process has a carbon dioxide neutral balance. What does that mean? For one thing, please note that carbon dioxide neutral does not mean carbon dioxide free. There are definitely carbon dioxide emissions during the production of the car, quite a bit of emission in fact. But if it is neutral, that means it absorbs the same amount of carbon dioxide elsewhere as it has released before. It creates a neutral balance. How does VW achieve that? By balancing it out. They support environmental projects. VW insists that these are tangible efforts, more than irrelevant paperwork, to keep the process as a whole neutral. We can only take their word for it. We can hardly verify it. What's crucial for me is that the manufacturer has an awareness of the situation when they say, okay, we really need to get an electric car to production, and the production process has got to get a lot better and with a lot less carbon dioxide emission. We have to rethink the production of electric cars in general. We can't just push the topic aside and say, yes, the combustion engine has a lot of problems too. Fracking is a threat to the environment. That's all true. But it doesn't make this production process any better. What else is there to say regarding the production process? One more thing. VW says that they managed to emit less than 125 kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilowatt-hour of battery produced. That's a good value if it's true, because the IFO Institute says 125 kilograms is a low value. If VW can reduce that even lower, that's good, because it makes the carbon dioxide backpack electric cars have, due to battery production, that much smaller. But you can't just stop there. You also have to see what kind of raw materials are in there. There's cobalt in there, for example. Cobalt is essential for the energy density of the battery. It's very important for the battery to have a high energy density, and there's a lot of cobalt in this battery. We're talking about 10 grams of cobalt per cell here. That's a lot, definitely. There are other manufacturers performing much better. Tesla, for example, uses 2.8 grams. VW claims they have a different cell chemistry. It's a different design. They still have a relatively high cobalt value and want to reduce it. What seems to be more important to them, however, is that they go after the raw material suppliers, for example, in Congo, and try to create clean supply chains there. Because if you look around in the Congo, where cobalt is often produced, then it is done illegally with child labor and underneath people's houses. It's awful. So if a manufacturer turns a blind eye to this issue, that's not good. And I think it's good to be aware so that you can address the situation and try to change it. And another point is the lithium that's in there. This is mainly extracted from salt lakes in Bolivia. The problem is you need a lot of water. The groundwater level is dropping, which is bad in general and negatively affects the farmers. It's just not a pleasant situation. I also asked VW about that, and they said, we are trying to get as much lithium as possible from producers outside of Bolivia. On the other hand, this implies that you probably can't fully avoid extracting raw materials from certain sources at the moment. There's still a lot to be done. At least the intentions are good. A few aspects have not yet been implemented. For example, the factory for the cells in Poland isn't finished yet. It's supposed to run completely on green electricity. Zwickau is also supposed to run on renewable energy only. So there are many new ideas and many good intentions, which leads me to conclude that theoretically, what VW is doing, their approach for this car to be environmentally friendly in the production process, is innovative, theoretically. In practice, a lot of it still has to be implemented. Good. Here comes my conclusion about the VW ID.3. To be honest, I still don't like that name, but it doesn't matter. Basically, VW is not the fastest company when it comes to penetrating new car markets and car segments quickly. The Tiguan, for example, came relatively late in the SUV segment. The same with the Touran, which came relatively late in the minivan segment. But once they were there, they sold pretty well and performed pretty well. And now, VW, after promoting the e-Golf and the e-Up rather half-heartedly, you could tell they really weren't enthusiastic about electric car segment at the time, now they are launching this MEB platform with power and vigor and with billions of dollars at stake. And what I've seen so far looks very promising. There are three aspects about this car I find particularly innovative. One is the platform, or rather the modular electric drive system, MEB, then the battery, and its production process, and also in principle the power unit. I like it very much. With a few other points, there is obviously still a little room for improvement, always. And therefore, my question to you is, what do you find particularly innovative about the ID, and where would you say, no, they can do better than that? Tell us in the comments below.